The 2020 Judicial Candidates Forums are made possible by a partnership between UNC-TV and the North Carolina Bar Association. You're on the court, yet people still may not know you and would like to know more about you. Tell us about yourself.
Sure, judges are pretty anonymous. My wife Marcia and I have been married for 28 years. We have 3 children. We're both lifelong North Carolinians. I grew up in Fayetteville, went to public high school. I'm a double Tar Heel for undergraduate and law school, and then I got my LLM degree a few years ago in a program that Duke Law School has for judges, a master's in judicial studies. After law school, I was a federal law clerk for 2 years. Then I practiced law at Walmart, Carlisle, Sandridge, and Rice for 13 years. Then I was a special deputy attorney general for 5 years at the Department of Justice. Then I went to work at the Office of the Governor as general counsel. I was appointed to the North Carolina Court of Appeals at the end of 2012, won re-election in 2014, and I was appointed by Governor Cooper to the Supreme Court in March of 2019. I'm proud to be the first Jewish member in the 200-year history of the court, and I'm proud to have published a book about the state Supreme Court that came out last year. So thank you again for having us. Thank you,
Tamara Barringer. You bring Senate experience, but tell us about your experience. What brings you into this race?
Thank you so much for this opportunity, Kelly. I really appreciate it. I'm Tamara Barringer, as you said, and I am a candidate for the North Carolina Supreme Court. I come from a very humble background. I'm from rural North Carolina originally. My daddy was a farmer. I'm a first-generation college student. My first home did not have indoor plumbing. So it is truly, really a miracle of the American dream and opportunity that I'm able to sit here today and be a candidate. I bring 35 years of legal experience to this race and will to the court. 25 of those years I represented small businesses, family businesses in their business and tax matters, which makes me an unusual candidate in that I have an extraordinary amount of experience with business and tax. I'm also a small business person myself in my own businesses. I have spent the last 15 years as a faculty member, as a professor at the business school in Chapel Hill, where I teach Master of Accounting students and undergraduate business students, aspiring business leaders, business law and ethics. I also taught before that at NC State University. I went to high school where David Thompson went to high school, and so I spent 5 years at the Poole School also teaching business, future business leaders business law. Before that, I developed the first Meredith Paralegal program for business, and so I've taught at all 3 of those fine higher learning institutions. I did serve, as you mentioned, Kelly, I did serve almost 7 years, over 6 years in the North Carolina General Assembly, where I chaired the Judiciary Committee, and I also sponsored 32 bills. I was the primary sponsor and drafter of 32 bills that became law. And that's quite an accomplishment, but what's so extraordinary is that most of them passed, all of them with bipartisan support, and most of them passed unanimously, House and Senate. And the reason for that, they were good public policy. A great deal of the work I did had to do with foster care. I was a foster mom for 10 years, and my husband a foster dad. And that's what really drove us to and inspires us to public service. It's a big reason that I am in this race for the court, because we need not only business leaders and people with practical business experience as we rebuild our economy in the courts, but we also need experience with families and children in crisis, because our families are also having such a tough time.
So you don't have to know much about courts to know Supreme Courts issue opinions. That's a huge part of it, where you gain your fame or lack thereof. But there are other duties that make a great associate justice. To you, what are those duties? What are those qualities?
Oh, that's an excellent question, Kelly. Thank you. To be a role model for other citizens. I am actually the director of the Master of Accounting Mentorship Program at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill in the business school. And we've been doing this for 10 years. And what it is a program for underrepresented minorities and first-generation college students. And I get to go into that classroom every day and work with these students who have no idea what business is like, have no idea what accounting is like, the profession of accounting. And as a judge, as a justice, I see that same responsibility, that same opportunity to inspire the youth and also to inspire confidence in our judicial system by all of our citizens.
Mr. Davis, what do you see are some top qualities an associate justice needs to possess to be truly excellent in their job?
Well, I think number one is fairness. It all starts with that. We live in a world right now, a state, a country that is very politically polarized, and we can't do anything about that. But the courthouse has to be the one place where partisan politics is totally put aside. There is no place whatsoever at all for partisan politics or any other sort of bias in the courthouse. And that's one of my biggest issues, judicial independence. There's a quote from a federal judge, Richard Arnold, in the early 90s. He was talking about the court system, and he said, there has to be a safe place, and we have to be it. And that's one of my favorite quotes, and I think it's even more true today than it was when he said it. All this partisan wrangling that's going on around us, once people walk in the courtroom, they have to be confident that their case is going to be decided strictly on the law. Doesn't matter what they look like, doesn't matter how much money they have in their pocket, certainly does not matter what political party they belong to. They need to be confident that the court is going to decide their case fairly and apply the law even-handedly. And that's the approach I've always brought to this job, and it's the approach I always will bring to this job.
You said partisan wrangling. A lot of voters expect their Supreme Court to have partisan wrangling. It's obvious in watching cable news. How do you keep that out?
Well, we all take an oath. We all put our hand on the Bible, and sometimes people lose sight of how important that is. We take an oath before God to follow the law as it is, not how we wish it was. And that's very, very important. I think about that oath quite a bit. Partisan politics has nothing to do. We decide legal issues, and our job is to be totally fair, totally impartial, read the briefs, read the records, do the research, and apply our own precedents, and of course follow the text of the law, the text of the constitutional provision, and that's how we reach our decision. And it distresses all of us in this profession when the media tries to portray judges as leaning to the left or leaning to the right. Every judge I know does it the way I do. We just try to do our job and live up to our oath.
Ms. Barringer, same question back to you. Voters and all these campaign ads, conservative and progressive judges is a big deal to people. I hear impartiality in this discussion. So what are we to think as a voter?
Well, what you need to know as a voter is that when that judge puts on the robe and takes that oath that is so important before God and before the constituents, that they're no longer a Democrat and no longer a Republican. They are a judge that will apply the law as it is written and not legislate from the bench, defend the Constitution as it was written, and not change it to the way that we would like for it to be. That's one of the biggest challenges, I think, for a human, to be able to do that, to set aside what their thoughts are or what they would like the law to be, but instead to apply the law as the citizens who sent their representatives and senators to the General Assembly to make law for them. It's their responsibility to make the law. The judges only apply the law fairly and evenly to all people before them. As I mentioned, I came from a very modest background. Anyone who will come before me, no matter what walk of life, deserves the same justice, deserves the same fairness, and also deserves the law to be applied to them as it was written by those representatives and senators.
How much should the state constitution live and breathe, as they say, versus being strictly interpreted as it was ratified?
Well, I'm a strict constitutionalist, and that's part of when we say that we're conservative, and I've said that on the campaign trail, that doesn't mean I'm going to bring conservative political beliefs. What it means is that we will apply the law as written, and I'm also a constitutionalist, which I do believe that the Constitution was written as it is to be interpreted now, as it is to be applied now. There is a way for us to amend our Constitution, and we've done so many times. It's to the people, it's for the people, not 7 judges sitting high in Raleigh to make those kinds of changes.
Mr. Davis, same question to you. How do you interpret the interpretation of our Constitution?
Well, what people sometimes forget is we don't decide issues out of whole cloth. We're very much a precedent-based system. Every case that comes before us, our court has weighed in on that issue in some form or fashion, whether it's a constitutional issue or a statutory issue. And part of the oath we took is to apply the precedents of our court, and that's what I try to do. Obviously, we start with the text, with the provision of the Constitution or a law passed by the General Assembly, and if the meaning is clear, then it's an easy case. But if the meaning is not clear, then we have to look to the historical context in which it was written, and we have to look at how our court, the Supreme Court of North Carolina, has applied that provision in prior cases. Because we want stability, we want continuity, we want each case to build on the last. And so that's how I approach the job.
Our partners at the Bar Association reached out to retired judges for some questions. So this comes directly from this panel of, no one's on the court, but they were there, and it's people that are generally respected across the spectrum. I'll ask you this because I won't claim this question. What factors will you consider in deciding whether to dissent? Bearing in mind that unlike the Court of Appeals, a dissent on the Supreme Court has no immediate effect.
Well, there are times for all of us on the Supreme Court when we disagree with the decision reached by the majority. And I think you have an obligation to dissent. I think it's important, even if, as you say, since we're a court of last resort, there may not necessarily be another court reviewing what we're saying. I think it's important on principle for us to explain why we disagree with the majority. And sometimes a dissent in one case is later followed by a later majority, and the original case in which the dissent was issued is overruled. And then also, maybe 10 to 15% of our cases, we decide federal law, and those decisions can be appealed to the Supreme Court of the United States. I dissented from a case a few months ago on a federal issue that I believe is being appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court. So maybe we'll get some clarity on that issue. But I do think members of the court have an obligation to dissent when they deem it's appropriate.
I have about 45 seconds left. I'll ask you the same question. How do you decide whether to dissent, given that no immediate effect?
Well, there is an immediate effect, and I do disagree with the question, because if the dissent is written in a way that regular people can read it, it brings transparency to what's going on in the court. Also, as far as the direct question of why or when, for me it would be when the law is not applied as written. Again, the laws are made by the people through their representatives, not by 6 justices or 7 justices.
I certainly appreciate both of you participating and introducing yourselves to the voters out there. And thank you for watching. This concludes our conversation. The 2020 Judicial Candidates Forums are made possible by a partnership between UNC-TV and the North Carolina Bar Association.